there was this saying in like startups and product where it was like, yeah, your idea is not that valuable. It's all about execution. And I think we're going to get to a place where it's actually going to flip, where your ideas are actually going to become much more important than the execution, because a lot of the execution can actually be handled by AI. The uniqueness and the value of your ideas is actually going to become much, much more important. So being creative and being able to have your point of view, I think it's going to increase even more in value than before.
Hey everyone, I am joined by Tim Metz. He is the head of marketing and innovation at Animalz, one of the most respected content marketing agencies in B2B. And today I'm really wanting to dive into what's working. I mean, you work with clients all over the world and you kind of know what's working today. Obviously, AI is a topic we'll cover, and, especially like founders, if they're just starting a content motion, what things they might want to keep in mind. So before we dive into like the hard nitty gritty stuff, I'm really interested in your background because before you started doing the world of marketing and content, you shared that you did some like video documentaries, traveled through Africa. Can you just share a little bit about what you were doing back in your younger days before you dove into content marketing?
Yeah, well, I guess I was kind of always doing content without realizing it. But yeah, when I was younger, I started doing like websites, and then that got me into video. And so then I was always thinking like, how can I combine work with pleasure or what I like to do? So yeah, I ended up doing a lot of video stuff, documentaries, filming big house parties and other music events and stuff like that. And then from there, slowly started doing a little bit more management, but always kind of in marketing or creative jobs and works and industries. And yeah, from that slowly ended up kind of in marketing roles. I guess if you don't define your own role, then it gets defined for you. Yeah.
It's an interesting story with a lot of marketers. Like we didn't start as marketers. A lot of us didn't go to school as marketers, but it's that sort of, you were in content, but of a different type, but you made your way over to the world of B2B, which can be, I think it's exciting. It's some passionate topic, for me, but how long have you been in this world, the more like business side of things?
Well, before joining Animalz, I was actually a customer of Animalz. So I was running marketing at KaiOS, which was a mobile operating system, also with an office in Taipei, actually, but I was in Hong Kong. And I was running the global marketing. And after that, it was pretty high, fast growth startup. I kind of wanted to take a step back, and I thought, what if I go back into more like a producer or like individual contributor kind of role? And so that's how I ended up at Animalz as a content marketing manager. And I thought, I can write, like, how hard can it be? But it was actually really hard. So the first 6 months were a real struggle. And then slowly I got the hang of it. And I spent like 2.5 years, I think, working as a senior content marketing manager at Animalz. And then early last year, took over marketing at Animalz and innovation.
And we were joking about your title, right? The innovation. So can you tell me, like, what does that mean in terms of, I'm sure there's a lot of, it could mean a lot of things, but what does it actually mean in terms of your day-to-day that you're doing innovation at a content marketing agency?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. One is the AI, in the sense that I was definitely not the first one to, like as Animalz, we've been actually looking into AI for a long time. We had people like Ryan Law and Andrew, who was more like our in-house tech person or developer.
I met Ryan a few months ago. Very cool guy.
Yeah. And if you go back in the blog, I was actually quite surprised recently when I was doing research for one of our pieces. Like, I think already in 2020 or 2021, they were doing experiments with like GPT-2 or something like that. So like, I was definitely not the first one to work with AI, but I think at some point I was at least of the regular content marketing managers, probably the most serious to really dive into it after ChatGPT came out. So I think in that sense, I was kind of a bit at the forefront of it, at least internally, and really pushing for it, like, well, we need to pay attention to this and trying what's possible. So I think that's one part where the innovation thing came from. I think the other thing is that I think they're really closely related. If you look at what I do in our marketing, what we do with our marketing, we try to do also kind of experiments that we can't yet do for customers, right? So if we see like, whether it's a new tool, so a lot of it is AI, but it can also be other things like, oh, what about this crazy strategy, right? Like, could it work for, could that work? And it's like, you don't want to try it on a customer immediately, usually. So then we tried it in our own marketing. So actually there's quite a close relation between innovation and marketing, at least at Animalz. So I think that's where that kind of weird.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I recently saw your CEO share about like one of the case studies of Byword. Are you familiar with this? Like basically they helped helped a company to do all the using AI probably a year ago where you were doing a lot of like mass publication. They got the traffic, but then with the Google updates, it was actually ended up being a big loss recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So were you involved in some of those experiments that you were doing things like that, like early on to kind of test things, or there's a lot more examples now of things that are working and aren't working. So I'm curious, like what has worked for you or things that you've tested.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, what you're talking about, like it was not one of our customers. I think he was.
No, it was not your customers. They were sort of highlighting an example of do not do this. It wasn't your customer.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things we've tried. I think I would say maybe maybe a bit of a more generic takeaway, but what I've noticed in my own work was that like I tried a lot of things, like let's say now almost 2 years ago in that period, like 2000, let me get it right, 2023. Whereas like I had all these ideas and I was like, oh, what if we let it generate the outline, right? Or what if we let it write a better intro? What if we and then it like always seemed to maybe work, and then in the end you put in all this time and it didn't work. And I think that happened to a lot of people probably. And I think that's why a lot of people maybe have abandoned also in some ways AI. Whereas I think in the last 6 to 12 months, the models have gotten so much better that now all these things that maybe 2 years ago you were thinking like, oh, this could work, now actually start to work and they are possible. So it's kind of almost like revisiting some of those ideas. And now suddenly you see that most of them click and actually are possible.
Are there different parts of the process? So, I mean, obviously, in terms of content marketing, there's a whole process from start to finish to publication. What are the areas that you found have been most helpful, applying? I don't know, it could be AI, it could be a workflow, it could be generating outlines. Like what areas of the content creation process do you think have been most helpful?
I think there are many, but I think what we're seeing at the moment, let's start where it's still least helpful. I think is in the actual writing. That's maybe like it's getting better, so you can definitely help it to kind of get to a draft maybe, but it's still really hard to get it to really mimic a certain style like perfectly so that you can really use it. So I think that part is still very difficult. I think but in most other areas now it's starting to become really helpful. Like whether it's like research, obviously, especially recently with all these different deep research features coming out, I think are really helpful for doing research, but also like processing large amounts of information, like where there's like you have you have data or you have interview transcripts or things like that. And also there's also kind of data now is like looking at like an SEO strategy for like a keyword strategy. Like with AI now you can really pull in information from not just from like keyword rankings and competitors, but even like throw in the mix maybe like engagement you see on social or an email, and use all that information together to figure out like which topics are resonating or like where do we have gaps. And of course you could do gap analysis before, but I think you can make it much richer, and the AI can just like have so much more ability to go through all this data. And then I think another one is what I would call more like skill expansion. Like we can all do a bit of design now or a bit of coding. I mean, not always as good as it should be, but it just expands the abilities that we all kind of have, I think. I would say those are
great examples. I'm curious for your customers, have their demands changed? Are they asking for different things, or are there different strategies that you found helpful? Like what's changed for you in terms of how you deal with customers now versus 2-3 years ago?
It depends. I think it depends really on the customers. It's kind of surprising. Like some customers, like I think it's anywhere from like some customers come like prospects, right, on a call, and they will say like, I do most of the calls I do and Ty, like the sales discovery calls, Ty, our CEO. So I see almost everything coming in. And I would say it's on a range of like people who come in and they want like, I don't know, they expect like 20 high quality content pieces for nothing almost. It's like, oh, but you have AI, right? Which is not possible. And then the other end of the spectrum is like still some people come in with almost the same kind of request as 3 years ago, where they're just happy to say, yeah, I want like 4 or 5 high quality blog posts. And I'm happy with that if they're good, right? And then there's a lot in between. So I think people are starting to realize that more is possible. So whether it is like doing larger or more extensive data reports or more interviews and these kind of things. So yeah, like I think the the expectations and what people want is kind of pretty much all over the place.
So, is there any particular strategy that you say is like particularly helpful, especially for early stage companies? I mean, I think maybe something new, or maybe it's something that's, maybe the core fundamentals haven't really changed.
I mean, I would say like, well, it depends. Like if you really look at like very early startups and what they can do, I think that's very different from like a content team at an established
Yeah. I'm more
B2B
interested in early
company.
stage companies, and what they could do if they don't have, maybe they're thinking about content or they're thinking about something like they want to stand out. Maybe they want to do founder led marketing. There's some kind of things that are on a lot of early stage startups' minds. So I'm curious for that group, for early stage companies, any particularly interesting strategies?
Well, I would say like, because we also did an interview series with some founders like in the middle of last year, so that was actually really interesting, like how they approach their LinkedIn and how they do their content. I think what I would say is like if you're really early stage and it's mostly the founder who's interested in doing some content, but you don't have a lot of resources, I think the first thing is still like, just kind of block out time every day, ideally like 30 minutes at the start of your day. If you do that consistently every day, to write for a channel that like feels natural for you or your audience, so whether that's email or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, or X or whatever, feels good to you, like focus on the channel, create content for it. Then also consider like where in your team or in your company are you maybe creating artifacts, let's call them artifacts, or materials that you could actually reuse for content, right? So whether it's like maybe you're already doing like customer interview, like user research interviews, or maybe you're fine with like, I don't know, sharing your internal product roadmap meetings or something like that, and try to repurpose that into content, because that's become much easier with AI. And then thirdly, I think find a way for yourself to capture your ideas throughout the day, like record a voice memo or things like that, and then build a simple prompt sequence or something like that to pull ideas out of that or get like rough drafts, and then just keep doing those three things. I think that's like the most basic but very simple approach to get like authentic content and make it a habit and make sure you hit some kind of volume, meaningful volume.
Those are great tips. I think people don't realize they're actually sitting on a lot of potential content ideas. Like you said, these really concrete or specific things that only you can say. So customer interviews is an example. Founder ideas, like you said, that's something like you can actually take an idea now, and with a few prompts, you can kind of expand that into something that's more shareable. So those are some great tips.
Yeah, and also, but I think that's those, and I think that core kind of scales also to larger teams, in the sense that because of AI, there's so many sources of ideas that previously, you would need a large team at least to go through that, and now you can even as a small team. So indeed, whether that's interviews or certain data or I don't know, certain materials that get created somewhere in your organization that are actually great sources of unique insights that only your company has, that you can now actually process, and sometimes even in an automated way, like say like, okay, we're going to check this kind of materials every week or every month and get like ideas out of that, or even rough drafts. I think that's a really big opportunity for a lot of organizations.
So the things you're talking about, I'm curious, what do you use, either you or the team there at Animalz? What's your tool, like must-have tool list, I guess, besides ChatGPT? Anything that helps you with prompting? I talk to marketers all the time, and I've gotten introduced to new tools like Lex. So I want to know, like, what do you use on a daily basis to help you do some of these things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a difference between I would say what there's a little bit of difference between what some tools we say people can decide for themselves. So for example, I use Lex, but not everybody's using Lex, and I'm using ChatGPT Pro a lot, but not everybody's using ChatGPT Pro. So I think that's more of a personal preference.
I think you recently wrote about how you're really impressed by ChatGPT Pro. You say it's worth the $200 a month. Is that right?
I think it's worth it if you can live with the downsides, so to say.
Okay, tell me more. What do you mean?
Well, I think it's really good. So I still think it's probably the best model out there. But it is like, it's kind of clunky if you use it. So if you first ask it something the first time, like it's always like very verbose, like it will throw out a lot of copy, like it's so at first it's kind of off-putting, because you ask it something and then you get like you get a response like this, and it's very hard to kind of make sense of it. But it is actually really, can I say intelligent and clever. So once you see through that and you start to also know like how to tell it, like use fewer words and be more concise and give me a more instructive answer, I think it is the best model for being able to process like really large amounts of information. So it's almost like the more information you give it, the better it performs. Whereas I think with most other models, it's almost the opposite. And so whether you use it for strategy or for copy editing or things like that, like it really holds it together. Whereas like I think copy editing is a good example where if you do that with other models, it usually doesn't really work because the models struggle with really following rules and then applying that to a piece of text. Whereas I think O1 Pro is really good at that. So I think that's why I think it's a great model. But if you look at the price tag and if you're not aware what to use it for, obviously it's not for everybody, I would say. And then there's things like you can't attach files and documents and things like that. So that's really annoying. So you're always like copy pasting like super large pieces of text into it. So yeah, it has a lot of downsides, but I think if you can learn how to work with it, I think it's quite worth it.
Okay, so is there any advice you have for teams, like things that they should absolutely be doing right now? Obviously, you're probably at the forefront of trying a lot of these things, but if you're talking about an average sort of B2B marketing team or an early stage startup, anything you think they should absolutely be doing right now?
I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think everybody should be trying out AI and see where it can work for them. And then I think when you look specifically at SEO, I think, try to use AI for the good parts of it or the benefits that it can bring and not the bad parts. So like, let it help you analyze your strategy and analyze the keywords and things like that. Let it help you automate certain tasks like writing briefs, for example, or doing your reports. And again, it doesn't mean that like you should not be involved at all in writing your brief, but there's certain aspects of that you can automate. And then I think besides SEO, I think it's also like try crazy stuff. I think it's also the time to do like really different things because there is so much things that can be automated and so many people are doing kind of the same things. So, we had a customer publish actually a printed book, try to be more transparent in what you talk about, share more personal stories. And then I think the other thing is just what we touched on already, but like keep thinking about like where can you find those unique insights, because I think that's going to be so important. And whether that's in data you have or in interviews, but also, for example, events. I think events are a great source of information and insights because you get all these people together, whether it's from your own company or experts who are speaking there, and then do interviews there and generate content from that. I think that's super important as well.
I think that is one of the use cases a lot of people I speak with talk about is you could think of it as repurposing, but as you're saying, it's actually finding unique insights and things you already have or things that are already going on. So events, transcripts, interviews, even internally, interviewing people within your own exec team. Those are things that can really quickly AI can help you go from like raw material to something really useful. I definitely think I agree with that. I want to talk a little bit more about SEO. So I know you guys are more content marketing agency, but like what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in terms of SEO or anything that you can advise teams as, things are changing. It could have been perhaps the biggest channel for some companies, and now they're getting scared because of like big changes. So what are you guys seeing in terms of SEO or things that might be helpful for the audience out there?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing with SEO is that we mostly still see it working quite well. So I would definitely not say like, oh, you need to stop with SEO or SEO is dead or anything like that. And I think also what people so far, also from talking to others, we're almost relaunching our podcast, which is about AI. So we've talked to a lot of people in the AI space. Nobody really has an exact answer of like, oh, here's what you need to do to show up in these AI tools. But one thing that's for now very clear is that there's definitely a correlation between what's good for traditional SEO is also good to show up in these AI tools. So even if you think that SEO is in decline, even if you follow like kind of standard SEO practices, that's still going to probably help you to rank in these AI tools. So I think it's still a good idea to keep a focus on SEO. And in that, I think you can just really make your strategy more sophisticated. So like, we also touched on that a bit earlier already, but like you have so much more capabilities to look at what your competition are doing, what you yourself have been doing, what has been working, because you can analyze this data much better. And so really get a sense of like what's working well, where are gaps, which are topics I haven't covered. And another aspect is refreshing content, which we've always thought is super important and overlooked part of SEO and content marketing in general, because it's always more exciting to like write new content. But if you go back and refresh older things, that actually can get you really good results. And that's getting a bit easier with AI now, because you can help, use AI to kind of identify what needs to be updated. And so refreshing is becoming lower lift, but still high value, because it's still going to get you traffic. And anyway, it's good for your readers. Yeah, I think those are some of the tips that come to.
Yeah, I think, well, you said, you won't say SEO is dead, but if you do on LinkedIn, you might go viral. Those are the kinds of things that...
it's popular to say that, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn, because I do, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think, how do you help companies, whether it's the founder or, people in the team, how do you help them with maybe content on LinkedIn versus content on blogs? Like, how do you think about the difference and how they can work together, if someone wants to be really active on LinkedIn as part of their content strategy?
I think LinkedIn, well, there's a few parts to LinkedIn. I think one is that generally speaking, can be a bit lower lift than a blog post. So LinkedIn can actually be a very great place to try out the ideas and see what works before you spend the time to write like a big blog post or do another kind of big asset. So you can see a little bit as a testing lab in a way. Of course, you don't want to do something really stupid, but I mean, you can post things and see how it goes. And then the things that work well, you then take them to your newsletter or to your blog post. I think that's one thing. I think the other is that it's very important, if you use it for thought leadership, that you have the thought leaders involved. So we see, especially at larger organizations or larger teams, that sometimes people say, oh yeah, we need to be on LinkedIn. But then the people who are supposed to be the thought leaders actually don't have time to really be involved in it, especially now that there's AI. They'll be like, oh, you can just generate that ChatGPT or with AI. And that obviously doesn't work, because then you just get very generic, like inauthentic things. But at the same time, if you put a little bit of time into it, it's become much easier, because again, you can interview those people who want to do the thought leadership, and then have others, if you're a busy executive, help you get it to the finish line. So I think that's an important thing. And then the other is just like finding, and whether that's because you're writing it yourself or you add interesting visuals or you just refine the AI workflow you have, but really do try to find a way to make it stand out and different from what everybody else is doing. Because, I think we are getting a bit sick of seeing the same kind of format and the same kind of structure over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So I think that's increasingly... There's no like one size fits all answer for that, but I do think we all know, like, and you can see this, like there's a certain post that works and then you see it everywhere suddenly, and then you're kind of fed up with it. So
do you have any examples that you would point to personally that you say they're doing a great job on LinkedIn in maybe not doing all the same things that everyone's doing? Anyone that you follow?
I always like what Jess Cook is doing. Like, we had her on an interview, so that's really nice. I always like what Ryan Law, what he does, because it always feels very on point, and also he really has his own style. I really like Ryan Baum. He's always writing in a very authentic way and always has interesting insights. And then I always get his name wrong. Is it Kieran, who's at HubSpot, who does a lot of the marketing for HubSpot?
Yeah, that's right.
He also does the podcast of Marketers Against the Grain. I mean, he's always so fast and on point, and he has really good insights about AI. And then one that I always like is also Tom Goodwin. I think he's like more like a UK journalist about tech, so that's much more broad, but he always has these really controversial, well, not always controversial, but just interesting takes, sometimes controversial, on all kinds of topics related to tech. And then I just randomly dip in and I spend way too much time on LinkedIn, actually.
Yeah, I do too. I totally understand.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious about just Animalz as an agency. How do you think that the agency has evolved? I mean, I know you've been there for the past 2 years, but I happen to have interviewed several people who used to work at Animalz. I feel like your tentacles in the world are long, or a lot of people have touched Animalz one way or another. So how do you think the agency has evolved itself and continues to be so relevant today?
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, it has evolved a lot. I think at some point we were at a business model that was almost like it was perfect product market fit for a long time, where it was like just everybody wanted like 4 or 5 high quality blog posts. We had a package for that. We had a perfect system for that. And then we were just kind of, everybody wanted that, and that worked perfectly for a while. A lot of it was SEO driven, even though people don't know us as an SEO agency, but a lot of what we did was actually focused on SEO plus then thought leadership. And I think that worked perfectly. And then I think we got to a point like 2 years ago where that started to work less, or at least it was still working, but we also needed to do other things. And so we had a period where we kind of had to reinvent ourselves a little bit in terms of internally and how we, what we deliver to customers and things like that. But then at the same time, I think the idea of delivering quality and thought leadership and doing good research is more relevant than ever and has kind of remained. So I think we've started to rebuild around that. And I think that's starting to work well now. And then I think at the same time, we've always done our own content and our own brand in a very serious way, which also not every agency does or has the luxury of doing. And I think that also really, even today, like people come on our sales calls and they will say like, oh, I've been following you for years. Like I'm a really big fan, things like that. So I think also our own brand and our own content and our own marketing has had a very, it's a very strong asset and has really helped for us to stay relevant and for people to recognize us.
How many people that do the internal marketing, I guess, so not the agency part, but the people who do the branding for Animalz? I didn't realize you had people dedicated to that.
Well, that's mostly me, I'm dedicated. I mean, we all do it, right? So there's different people writing on the Animalz board, but I'm the only person who's like full-time on the marketing. But we've always had, so before me it was Ryan, and before that was Jimmy. So there's always been, not always, but like pretty, since, I think at least for the last 5-6 years, I think there's been one person more or less fully or almost fully dedicated to our own marketing. And so I think for a marketing agency, that's quite a unique thing. Not everybody has that. So, and I think that's. Or
the founder does it because they're the one who's, selling or something. Yeah. I also have a question. I'm just so curious. There are so many agencies out there. I guess there's small agencies. Why do you think there's just so many agencies? And I don't know. And any thoughts about the agency world in general? Because at one point I was like, hey, should I join an agency? Do I need agency experience as a marketer? Because I have never worked in an agency. So I'm just curious about what that world is like as someone who works inside behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had the luxury of, I don't know if it's luxury, but I joined Animalz from a completely different role. So I haven't been in like multiple.
But you've seen them both, so that's why I'm curious. Startup world and.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a few reasons specifically for content marketing agencies. I think one is like, if you're a freelancer and there's a lot of freelancers and you start to get more and more work, then at some point the logical step is to say, hey, I become an agency, right? So it's like, it's the kind of the next step after freelancer is to call yourself an agency. Because I think there's agencies that are like 2, 3, 4 people, and there's agencies that are like dozens of people. So I think that's one reason. I think another reason is that especially with SEO, I think it was almost like, I wouldn't say printing money, but like it was such kind of a, like SEO was such a almost guaranteed win for a long time with a pretty clear system of how to do it, that it totally makes sense for people to say, oh, I launched an SEO agency, and like the playbook is kind of pretty clear of like how to do it. Still doesn't mean it's easy, but like I think so then it's like, oh, if I start an agency, maybe I'll have higher margins and then doing it by myself or working for another agency. So I think that's also why more people launch agencies. And then now I think also maybe because of AI, you also get even more folks who think, okay, with AI it's easier to create content, so I can create an agency. But at the same time, I mean, everybody notices that as well, that in that sense, then, you need to find a way to stand out, because everybody will say, oh, we can create content for you. We can make you win. And so that's hard. Then it becomes more like a commodity.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you talked about brand before this. You guys, have invested in brand. I guess, do you think that with content is easier than ever to create, whether you're an agency or just a company, do you think brand is going to become even more important? Because I feel like your brand, or your evidence of your brand on the internet is going to become more important than ever. So like, how do you think about that? Because I think some people say, I don't know. No, I don't think anyone's saying content marketing is dead, but like there's something more important than that to me behind that, which is like the trust. How do you signal the trust when you're now in a market that's more crowded than ever? So do you have any thoughts on, things that are now more important than they used to be?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think brand was already always very important, more important, I think, than most people realize. And I think it's going to become even more important because when it's coming from a brand that you trust and that you know that it's real, first of all, like it's trusted, right? Because there's also going to be so much more garbage and fake information and things like that. So I think that's going to also drive brands. I think people will find the purpose and the story and the authenticity behind a product even more important than they already did, because there's going to be so much generic stuff out there. And then I think, and that relates a little bit to brand, but I think also people like buying from, like, who are the people who are behind this brand, or who are the team that make up this company or that make this product. And again, it's not something that's completely new. I think people always are interested in those kind of stories, but I think that's going to be even more important as people wonder, like, okay, where is this coming from? Why is this different from something else? What are the values of the people behind this organization or behind this product? So yeah, I think it's going to be more and more important. And then still, how do you differentiate? Yeah.
I was going to say, I heard a metaphor, like now showing your receipts is more important than ever, showing the work. So like if you say something, like showing pictures of this thing, or showing, like, you need to show something concrete because, I mean, I guess in theory, AI can generate that, but it's those insights that are unique and concrete and specific to you that help make it believable and show that, like, this is real. And I think all of those things go into building a brand, whether that's a personal brand or your company brand. I think those are consistently doing those things are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, you mentioned it before, but I think that's one of the things we see, and it wasn't always on purpose, but I think that's one of the big assets we have as an agency, that Animalz feels a bit different to most people than your standard B2B content marketing agency, just because it always had this voice and it's been putting out opinions about content marketing. And so, yeah, I think that applies to any kind of business that wants to stand out. Yeah.
Having an opinion, having a point of view, I think is critical. And I think, I would talk with a lot of people about their personal brands. And I think sometimes you don't know what your opinions are, or you don't know where you have those really strong points of view. So I encourage people to like start sharing, like start posting on LinkedIn to kind of develop those points of view if you don't have really strong ones. You don't have to be controversial about everything, but you do have to develop your point of view on certain things that are relevant and meaningful for your industry or your space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think some people can take it too far also, where they think that everything has to be controversial, but yeah, you need to have like a unique point of view or something. And I also think indeed, like, sharing it on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever is a good way to get started. And, it feels bad if nobody responds to your post, but it also kind of means nobody saw it. So it's like, if you're not like a very established voice, it's not really the end of the world, I'd say, unless you say something really crazy. But like, you can, yourself, you feel pretty bad. But like in reality, there's not that much you could really do wrong. You can just try different things and you see what resonates. And then if you learn from that, you develop your point of view and you develop what works for your audience and you help build that. So yeah, I would also say just get started and try things out.
Well, I have learned quite a lot in our conversation. It was only, 30 minutes. So I appreciate you sharing and giving us a little insight into what's working. Is there anything else, any last minute thoughts that you'd like to leave the viewers with?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be more about like, I think the future of marketing, or at least of content, I think it's going to be much more about like your ideas and your originality and curating and selecting and things like that. I think there was this saying in like startups and product where it's like, yeah, your idea is not that valuable. It's all about execution. And I think we're going to get to a place where it's actually going to flip, where your ideas are actually going to become much more important than the execution, because a lot of the execution can actually be handled by AI. Doesn't mean it can do everything, but like, I think the uniqueness and the value of your ideas is actually going to become much, much more important. So being creative and being able to have your point of view, I think it's going to increase even more in value than before.
I think it's a great point. I think it is something you can kind of develop. Like I said, if you're not sure, like if you need more ideas, you want to be creative, it is a muscle you can work on by doing it and by sort of putting your work out there, getting feedback. So I think it's great advice, and it's something that we can all work on.